Good morning, everyone. Sorry that I couldn't be with you in person this morning. It is in Vermont. We hold our town meetings a week prior to New Hampshire, and my town holds it the Saturday prior to town meeting day. And as the chair of the town and school meeting committee, that's where I am this morning. So hopefully you find this video helpful, where we've recorded the presentation of the zoning amendments so that you have that information to vote in an educated manner on town meeting day. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can follow along when this is playing up on the monitors with the zoning amendments. So bear with me while we do that. All right, so you should be seeing the shared screen up there. So we'll start with the first zoning amendment. This is an amendment to the cluster subdivision regulations in the zoning ordinance. Cluster subdivisions are subdivisions like Trestle Ridge or Snowcrest or Great Pines, or the portion of Fenwood that is comprised of the detached homes. And what a cluster subdivision allows you to do is to develop the homes on smaller lots and reserve the difference in the land that's required in the zone district as open space. So you don't get to build any more units than you would under the traditional zoning. You just get to build in a more compact footprint, which has benefits to the public in that it's a smaller disturbed area, and it has usually space that is open to those in the community as reserved open space. And there's a benefit to the developer that it's usually cheaper to develop in a more compact area with less infrastructure, but it does have mutually beneficial advantages. So what we've proposed here is to eliminate the minimum tract of land size for a cluster development, which right now is at 5 acres. So this means that you can't have a cluster development unless you have a lot of 5 acres or more. So in the R1 zone, where you only need a little less than a quarter acre per house, that means that you have a pretty sizable development as your baseline. And so what the planning board would like to propose is that there's not a minimum. And because it doesn't give you any additional units, they feel like if you have a acre lot in R1 that would allow you to build 4 units, that doing so in a cluster could also be beneficial. And so they'd like to eliminate the minimum of the 5 acres. In conjunction with that, the buffer strip that's required right now in this zone is 100 feet across all zones, which if you're on a smaller lot doesn't make a lot of sense. If you are developing a small cluster subdivision of say 2 or 3 houses, 100 feet around the perimeter would really chew up all of the property. So they are proposing that the 100 feet remain in the conservation, the agricultural, rural, residential, and the residential R2, and that it'd be 50 feet in the R1 zone district. So then let's see here where those 2 modifications to the zone district are. And then that concludes the details of amendment number 1. So amendment number 2 is an amendment along some similar lines. This is in the planned unit development. So planned unit development is like a condominium, so either Hilltop or Highland Ridge, the Seasons, but it also includes commercial condominiums like the Gallery. And so this is the section of the ordinance that governs that style of development. Similarly, it had a 5 acre minimum. The planned unit development overlay district is sort of an organic shape. It doesn't align with one zone or another, but it is in the zoning ordinance. It's on the website if you want to take a look at that, but it's a smaller area sort of centralized around the commercial and R1 and a little bit of R2 zones. Similarly to the elimination of the 5 acres in the cluster, the intent is here that it would allow for small scale infill development. So for example, the condos on Main Street, like the Barton condos or the old hospital building condos, those are on lots that are nowhere near 5 acres, and you couldn't replicate those. Now, in a couple of those scenarios, the density that's there is higher than what the zone allows anyways, but fundamentally on a half or 3/4 of an acre lot, you couldn't even get a condo of 2 or 3 units there as this ordinance is in place. That being said, there is a case law that requires us to allow for the conversion to a planned unit development from, say, a rental setup, if nothing is changing other than the ownership structure. So if you have a 5-unit apartment building in the commercial zone and you come to the planning board and you have the 25,000 square foot lot that you needed in order to get your 5-unit rental apartment building, the planning board would have to approve that conversion to a planned unit development. So the fact that there's this sort of backdoor way of getting in there in scenarios, the planning board really feels like this is a piece of the ordinance that needs attention, that we shouldn't be creating a barrier to make someone go this roundabout way that ultimately gets them there in the end. So similarly with this, we haven't proposed actually changing the setback. We're simply, it was stated in 2 spots. And so we are proposing that one of those spots be eliminated for clarity purposes. Additionally, there's a section in the planned unit development that concerns water and sewer connections. And as you may be aware, with the planned unit development of New London Place, we had to grant a variance for them this summer because it's not possible for them to connect to the water system, as you are likely aware. And so the planning board feels like that provision should be eliminated if we know it's not possible. Additionally, we've modified the sewer portion of this to require that the development connect when it's within 100 feet of the sewer system, which sewer systems are addressed connection in state law, and this models that. Water systems, for whatever reason, are not addressed in the same manner in state law. That wraps up the proposed changes to the planned unit development. So as you can see, those two are pretty similar, cluster and planned unit, similar idea of allowing for some small scale infill development. Neither suggestion gets you any density bonus. It is simply based on the density of the underlying zone. So the third zoning amendment has to do with the side yard setbacks in the R1 for properties that do not connect to water and sewer, and all of R2. In this zone currently, as it's written, we allow for a minimum of a 20-foot setback on one side, as long as the 2 sides of your property add to 50. So if you go down to 20 on one side, you've got to have 30 on the other. If you're at 22 and 28, however you can come up with the required 50 as the aggregate. This is a unique way of setting up side yard setbacks, and it's fairly arbitrary as far as which neighbor gets the 30. One neighbor gets 20 and one neighbor gets 30, or the combination thereof. And so the planning board feels like it's really time to just make this an even 20-foot on either side. It's presented some challenges in laying out properties. They had discussions about proposing even 25 on each side to maintain that 50-foot aggregate. But unfortunately, because we've allowed 20 feet on one side for so many years, we would be catapulting a number of properties into legal non-conforming status. And so they really felt that going down to an even 20, which we already allow on one side, on both sides really made the most sense. Right, so zoning amendment number 4. This is the amendment proposed to the accessory dwelling unit regulation. So as you are very much aware, the Housing Commission and the Planning Board have been working hard to try to address the housing crisis that exists not only in New London, but the region and the state. And so this proposal makes some modifications to the existing ordinance. First, here you will see that it allows for the production of a detached accessory dwelling unit on your property. So what they're proposing is that someone could have an attached or they could have a detached unit, a one or the other. And then in addition to that, they've proposed some changes to the actual standards. For example, that you could have a 3-bedroom instead of a 2-bedroom, which is what we allow now. That you could go up to 1,250 square feet of interior finished living space, as opposed to the 1,000 square feet of interior finished living space that we allow now. The idea behind this is that the needs for people's homes have changed. A lot of people are working from home now, and so bedrooms are being chewed up with home offices, and it's reasonable to think that someone with a kid may need 2 bedrooms for actually sleeping in and another bedroom for a home office, or that say a single parent might need a bedroom for each one of their 2 kids, and so we're trying to be understanding of what some unique circumstances may be, and make these, modest adjustments that may provide more flexibility for the user. Additionally, you'll see that we are adding a provision to not allow short-term rentals of the accessory dwelling units. And this is simply to encourage that the ADUs be kept in the housing market. We've with this proposed a definition of short-term rental, which is at the end here. That is, a short-term rental is an accessory use of a residential dwelling unit rented for a fee for a period of less than 90 days. And we settled on the less than 90 days with the understanding that many of our traveling healthcare professionals that work in New London and throughout the region are on 90-day contracts. And so we know that they oftentimes turn to units like these for their housing. And so we didn't want to preclude that ability for, those necessary individuals to be able to live here in the short term. And then we also added a provision that would require no more than 2 parking spaces for the ADU. We require 1 per bedroom, which if you're having a 1-bedroom makes sense. And then if you're having a 2-bedroom, 2 makes sense. But we didn't feel like if you're going to a 3-bedroom that you needed to have 3 parking spaces. We don't require any single family units to have more than 2 parking spaces. So we didn't think that that was necessary here. So then on the end here, you'll see the language specific to detached accessory dwelling units. The placement of the unit shall not adversely affect the traffic on roads or safety of pedestrians and will not otherwise create a safety hazard. And then that shall not be considered an additional dwelling unit for the purpose of determining minimum lot size or density, which is the same in the attached section as well. So that pretty much wraps up the accessory dwelling unit section here. And the zoning amendment number 5. This is an amendment or a series of amendments to our floodplain overlay district. And I won't go through these each one by one. The state requires us to adopt a floodplain overlay district in order to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. And we have to be a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program in order for our property owners in New London to qualify to buy their flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program. If we don't, they're stuck going to third-party flood insurance providers, which are far more expensive. And so the state has given us a list of modifications. They went through our ordinance, told us what we need to change in order to stay up to date and maintain compliance. They do this with all the towns. Right now, they're focused in Kentucky watershed because they are working on remapping the FEMA floodplains in the Kentucky watershed, which will also be being rolled out, in the coming months. And so this was done in tandem with that. So nothing significantly different about what they've proposed, changes in language to update to what their current standards are. But this is a very necessary zoning amendment in order to maintain our compliance with the National Flood Insurance. And then the final zoning amendment. This is a zoning amendment by petition. And so this was petitioned to modify the definition of lodging house. And you can see the language of the petitioned modification here on your screen, where it's suggesting that the lodging house definition includes short-term rentals, and that the planning board issue a conditional use permit, and that there be inspections for code compliance from a dwelling official. It's a really well-intentioned petition zoning amendment. Unfortunately, we review all zoning amendments that we propose and that we get petitioned with town council. And in discussions, unfortunately, the way this was written, they didn't provide criteria for a conditional use permit, which is a integral part of the planning board issuing a conditional use permit, because a conditional use permit provides them some additional latitude within defined criteria. So our accessory dwelling unit regulation is one that you could look at to see what that might look like. In this case, there's no criteria, and so the planning board does not have a manner to review them in order to issue it or to not issue it. So the advice was that the planning board should not approve of this amendment. We're hopeful that after town meeting is done, that the interested parties, the selectmen, perhaps planning board, fire department, interested individuals can sit down and think about what a potential path forward may be to accomplish the same objectives, perhaps. So that's sort of an overview of this. Now, I know that you have a packed agenda this morning to get through the other warrant articles. Maybe you've already gone through them and this is wrapping up, I'm not sure. But we do have a couple of members from the planning board and the housing commission that were able to make it this morning that may be able to answer questions for you after the meeting. But please feel free to reach out to me in the next week and a half before you vote. Give me a call, send me an email. Happy to answer questions if you have them. This redlined text is on the website. It'll also be in the front section of your town report, which should be available sometime next week. Stop by the town office and pick one up, and you can see all of the language in there. I do want to touch on briefly the summaries on the ballot for the amendments. I know there's been some confusion on the accessory dwelling unit proposal and how it was written. And we made a conscious decision to include in the summary that the modification would allow either an attached or a detached accessory dwelling unit. And that was done because at one point the planning board was proposing something else, and we wanted to make sure that we were eliminating confusion, that it was an either or scenario, that it is either an attached or a detached. And as always, as voters, we have the obligation to do our homework ahead of time, come to meetings like this, hear the presentation, read the documents, and then ask questions if you have them. So the summaries that go on the ballot are much shorter, obviously, than what can be in the official text behind the scenes. So again, thank you guys for listening this morning, and if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. All right, have a nice weekend.